Gerald again.
Question 19, please.
Mr. Speaker, may I have your permission to take questions 19 to 21 on today's order paper together, please?
Yes, please.
So my reply will also address questions that have been raised by Mr. Muhammad Fahmi bin Aliman in an earlier sitting and also Mr. Saktiandi Supat for a later sitting on the topic of public transport fare adjustments. Excuse me. So in deciding on changes in public transport fares, the Public Transport Council aims for fares to keep up with cost increases over time whilst ensuring affordability. The fare formula, therefore, incorporates component indices such as core inflation, wage growth, and energy prices, which reflect the cost drivers of providing public transport services. The output of the fare formula establishes the fare increase cap for a given year. The PTC then considers various other factors before deciding on the actual fare increase to implement, and consequently, how much to carry over to future fare review exercises. The PTC considers overall economic growth, wage growth, unemployment rate, and other metrics that reflect the state of Singapore's economy at the time of each fare review exercise. PTC also seeks to ensure that public transport as an essential service remains affordable to all Singaporeans. As wages have risen over the past decade, households have been spending a lower proportion of their income on public transport. For the second decile of households, which essentially represents lower-income public transport users, this has fallen from 3.5% in 2012 to 2.5% in 2021. For the second quintile, which represents average public transport users, their figure has also fallen from 2.3% to 1.8%. In this year's fare review exercise, the fare formula output set the maximum allowable fare adjustment at 13.5%. One main contributory factor was the 117% increase in energy prices. The PTC decided to implement a lower increase of 2.9% after considering the economic and social impact on commuters. The remaining 10.6% will be carried over to future FREs. Meanwhile, the government will provide additional subsidies of about $200 million in the coming year to make up for the shortfall. This benefits all commuters as it defrays the overall fare increase. To reiterate, without this additional support, commuters would have had to pay a much higher fare increase of 13.5%. At each fare review exercise, the PTC also will consider both the carryover from previous FREs as well as that year's fare formula output. So, for example, in 2021, the formula output was for a minus 2.2%, in other words, a reduction. But there was a carryover amount of 4.4%, and therefore the increase that was implemented was 2.2%. Apart from the 10.6% carried over from this year, all other carried over amounts have been implemented. Over the past decade, we have enhanced the quality of our public transport system with a larger network, higher frequencies, and more reliable services. Despite this, fares have not kept up with costs of running the public transport system. From 2012 to 2021, the compounded increase in costs has been about 7%. Fares have been increasing over the same period about 1% a year. So the government has stepped up with funding to bridge the gap and ensure the continued operation of public transport services. The cumulative sum is now more than $2 billion a year, with the additional subsidy of about $200 million in the coming year. Mr. Gerald Giam asked whether the PTC decides on fare adjustments based on bus service reliability. We have made steady improvements over the past decade, with maximum schedule frequencies during peak periods falling from 30 minutes to 15 minutes today. In terms of excess waiting time and on-time adherence scores between 2018 and 2022, all services have met the required standards. And this includes Service 228, which I know is close to Mr. Giam's heart. Looking ahead, it is essential that public transport fares keep pace with cost increases. Otherwise, the public transport system will become financially unsustainable, and that will be to the detriment of commuters and taxpayers. When the PTC reviews fares, it will continue to ensure that any increases are subject to prevailing economic and social considerations. So let me reassure members that we are fully committed to ensuring that public transport fares remain affordable, even as we keep a keen eye on the financial sustainability of our public transport system. Today, seniors, students, lower-wage workers, and persons with disabilities are eligible for concession fares, and increases in their fares are typically less than that for adult commuters. Government has also made available public transport vouchers to cushion the impact of fare increases for eligible households. For this year's fare review exercise, these vouchers will help up to the 30th percentile of income-earning households or the 40th percentile of all resident households. And we will continue to address the needs of vulnerable commuters through the provision of public transport vouchers and other measures as necessary.
Gerald Giam.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for his reply. And indeed, Bus 228 is very close to my heart and, more importantly, close to the heart of my residents in Bedok Reservoir. I would like to clarify with him what he deems to be an acceptable interval between feeder buses, because he says that all the services, including 228, have met the standard. What is really the interval? Because I just checked the bus stop opposite Block 716 Bedok Reservoir Road, and it shows an interval of 7 to 15 minutes, which I would think that it's a bit long, because previously residents had several other buses to be able to get to Bedok Interchange from their houses, but now they have only one bus, so they depend on that bus and the low interval of that bus. Secondly, can the ministry look into reducing the headways further, because this will go a long way in terms of improving the commuter experience of many commuters. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his questions. I note that his questions are very specific and actually quite a deviation from public transport fares themselves. But nevertheless, first, what constitutes an acceptable interval? I think it's very hard to give a universally applicable answer. The reason is because same service, time of day, there will be variations. Because of traffic conditions, peak, off-peak, peak periods, you try to keep the headway shorter because of the needs, but off-peak, you allow for more. So there will always be a range. And that also applies to geographic distribution. So I think what we try to do is when bus contracts, because specifically the member's point is on buses, bus contracts spell out clearly the performance requirements, and we hold the PTOs who are awarded the contracts closely to the delivery of those KPIs. There are incentives and disincentives that apply when they deviate. And of course, if the deviations are systematic or problematic, then we take further action in that regard. Secondly, can we reduce headways? Well, there is, this is basically recanvassing the discussions we've had at the budget and many other occasions, and I compliment the member on his consistency in raising the issue. But the bottom line is this: every decision has an accompanying cost implication. So I notice the member has not commented on the 2.9% increase, so I assume you find it acceptable. But bear in mind that this comes with a significant subsidy from the government on top of what we're already doing for this year. Every time we reduce headways, it means you either have to have more buses, and therefore you also need more bus captains. Costs will go up, and we have to find ways to address this. Now, this is not a theoretical argument either, because over the years, if you look at it, in terms of rail reliability, mean kilometers between failures, we have actually made significant improvements because LTA has specified an outcome. But that is a number. To achieve that number or exceed it, they then have to invest, the PTOs have to invest significant resources on maintenance. That has a cost implication. We've added, I think, about 80-odd new bus services. That has a cost implication. So when we advocate, sure, I think we would all like to have shorter headways, more capacity and so on, but I just want to make the point that even as we consider this, we also have to take into account the cost implications, and as this year's exercise demonstrates, there is a major cost overhang that we are carrying, and we are carrying this as a government, as representatives of the people.
Saktiandi Sapat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's apt for the next PQ that I'm going to ask, which is in relation to the gap that the Minister mentioned. There's a 7% increase in the cost of transport expenditure and infrastructure, as Minister mentioned before. And also just now, Minister mentioned about 1% transport price increase annually. So there's this gap, about 6%. Whether this gap is sustainable is one question I have. And if the government subsidies will eventually stop. Second PQ is in relation to the public transport vouchers. Can I ask if eventually these PTVs can be permanent or enhanced even further and made automatic into future budgets? Thanks, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm conscious of the time, and I want to make sure I meet the on-time arrival KPI. But let me just address the questions very quickly, with your indulgence, sir. First, is the gap sustainable? As I've pointed out, that's precisely the issue, because our costs have been rising and our fares have not been anywhere near at that rate. There is a fare formula review exercise that's underway. I think we'll need to take a hard look at this, and that's what the PTC is working on. What exactly is the way forward for us? And this is not just about the sums, but it really comes down to an overall discussion on the compact that we expect. And fare formula and fare adjustments are not just about the current generation, because everything we don't pay now, as we've discussed in other debates, also has an impact on future generations. So we need to keep that in mind. Second, therefore, the implication for government subsidies, well, the government has stepped up and has clearly put in a significant amount, 2 billion and another 200 million for next year. What we do going forward will again be, I think, a matter of discussion that we will have to also address in this House as part of our larger policy with respect to public transport. And finally, can the PTVs be made permanent feature? Well, I suspect that question is best addressed by the Minister for Finance, but I would argue that from our perspective, and I want to reiterate the point, we are committed to making sure fares are affordable, especially for vulnerable commuters. That includes not just in the way we address fare formula, fare adjustments, fare increase adjustments, and the discounts or what we can do, and also through the concession passes, but it also is through the public transport vouchers. And as you would have noticed this year, and also in the previous exercise, there's been a very significant allocation for public transport vouchers, up to the 30th percentile of income-earning households. And I think that is a major provision, and we will continue to see what else needs to be done in that regard. And I suppose permanent PTVs could be one of the possibilities, but I think we should just see through this exercise first.
So there is indeed a cost to everything. Your tea break today would be 17 minutes instead of 20.